Hello learners, I Piyali Dr. Banik, SSCT 1 from the Department of Sociology from East Calcutta Girls College. Now, this particular topic, if we talk about the brief overview, we see that here this topic is about the meaning of rational choice theory, what it stands for. For any theory and its understanding, we cannot really ignore the fact that we need to have an understanding of the basic propositions about the basic assumptions or the premise that stands as the ground for the development of that particular theory. So, if we look at the second aim that we see here, that this particular theory or this particular presentation is aiming to analyze the basic assumptions and premise of RCT, that is rational choice theory. And the third one, it's discussing about the strengths and weaknesses of rational choice theory as a particular theoretical background. Now, if we look at the objectives of this particular presentation, we see that the first aim would be to have an understanding of the meaning of rational choice theory and its relevance to different disciplines towards its development. Because if we want to have an understanding of rational choice theory, we will see that it was not only the circumstance that led to the development of this particular theory within the broader sociological background, but there were many other theories that also had their own portions of contributions to make to the development of sociology as a discipline. Now, rational choice theory is one such important theory which, apart from other theories like functional theory, conflict theory, or critical theory, has its own contribution to make towards the development of sociological theory. So, if we are talking about rational choice theory, first thing we need to understand is its meaning, because without the meaning we cannot really understand that what leads to its origin, what leads to its development, and why the particular assumption stands for as this are standing today, and what is the basic premise against which this particular theory has been developed. So, the first objective is to understand the meaning of the rational choice theory. And not only that, we need to also understand the relevance of different disciplines towards the development of rational choice theory. The second objective here would be to analyze the assumptions and premise of rational choice theory. So, after understanding the meaning of rational choice theory as a particular theoretical background, it is equally important to have an understanding of the basic assumptions, because the assumptions only stands as the background for the present understanding of a theoretical perspective. And also, the premise is equally important to have an understanding of the rational choice theory as a theoretical perspective. But here we see that if we understand the meaning, the assumptions, and the premise of rational choice theory, it would not be enough. So we have our third objective here is to identify the strengths and weaknesses of RCT. Just like any other theoretical background, rational choice theory too has its own strengths and weaknesses. We cannot really tend to ignore those, because every theoretical background has its own pros and cons. The next slide is about, we are talking, or we will go on discussing about, we are going to discuss about is what is rational choice theory. Now, what is rational choice theory? The particular assumption here is people behave in the way they do because they believe that line of action has more benefits and cost. Just imagine yourself when we interact with other people or individual in our everyday life. What do? We generally, at the back of our mind or at the back of the interaction lies the fact that we parallelly try to evaluate that will this particular line of action will have more cost or will have more profit. So what people do, if someone is behaving in a way they are behaving, it's because they're actually rationally evaluating the possible costs or the possible prices rather, which are involved within that interaction system. And it is not only just about the cost and the prices, but it's also about the profits, about the gains from that particular line of action. So, for example, when a student wants to appear for the examination, what is the probable alternative for that student and wants to score a very good marks? So what is the probable alternative or what is the probable option available to the student? To study hard. So we as students study hard to get good marks in examination because we know that if we don't study we are not going to get good marks, and hence our examination will not bear us with the fruitful kind of expectations that we have set for ourselves. So this was for the first meaning. Now next is people make choices according to goals and given means. Now, as far as this particular thing is concerned or this particular statement is concerned, we see here that individuals for their goals they have got a number of means to attain. For example, if we want to reach a particular place or when we want to reach a particular place, we have a host of options in front of us. Either we can avail a cab or we can avail an auto rickshaw or we can avail bus or whatsoever or even a private car. So what we as individuals do, we have a goal that is going to a place. Now suppose I have been late in getting out from my house while going for that place. So, what will I do? I will take that means of transport that will be able to transport me faster or will be able to take me faster to my destination at a relatively lesser time. So, I will be availing that probable option. So what am I doing? There were many means. There were a host of transportation available to me, but I chose the one which will help me reach in my destination in the possible least time. So what we are doing here? We as individuals here we are making choices according to the goals and according to the means. And not only that, we as sociologists, we often use rational choice to understand social change. Now, learners see here, society is not only about social structures, it's also about social processes. Society is not only stand or it doesn't stand like a static entity. It's always changing. So change is equally important and inevitable as exists the structure or the statics. So sociologists here they refer to rational choice. Why? Because they want to understand social change, because in our everyday life when we look at ourselves as individuals we cannot deny the fact that we are immune to changes and particularly social changes. No, we cannot. We are just very part of society and we will be affected by any form of social change. that we encounter. So, what happens is that sometimes, as we see here, that some effects or those are inevident or those are bound to happen, but there are certain circumstances which are beyond our control. So, certain circumstances are our control, are under our control, and certain circumstances are not under our control. And as it is said in manifest and latent function, that while we are involved in certain line of action, there are certain actions whose consequences we can evaluate from an earlier period, or there are certain actions whose consequences we cannot really evaluate from an early period. So, just like that, we see that here social change is also inevitable. Sometimes we anticipate it and sometimes we cannot anticipate it. But we cannot deny the fact that it is our very choices as individuals that to a great extent influence or guide the social changes, because it might happen that because I chose a certain form of transportation that took me so long to reach my destination. That was my choice. So that was my choice that led to that social change. The destination and my home place was the same. It was only the transportation, the means of transportation that I chose that caused that change. So social change is ultimately what we see here. The sociologists are saying, or they're using that rational choice to understand that social change. And what we also see that is critics. They are saying that not always it is happening that actions are individual. They are always basing that actions on the basis of their cost and benefit analysis. Because critics are of the view that certain phenomena, certain lines of actions definitely exist and do exist, which cannot be explained with the help of cost benefit analysis. They are just beyond that kind of analysis where we cannot really understand that why that social phenomena took place. As for example, altruism. As for example, emotional attachment. This is something which cannot be explained with the help of cost benefit analysis. Now, we go to the different discipline and their influences on rational choice theory. The first discipline to be discussed here is the anthropology. And anthropology is all about the study of primitive society. But what really is of interest here is the system or the concept of gift. Because taking and receiving of gift is seen to be as a part of obligation that are very, very guided by certain customs and rituals. We see more or less in every society that if a group or if an individual receives a gift, somewhere or the other, that particular individual or that group forms a kind of obligation to return or to present with a gift to the giver or some other occasion. So there is a kind of obligatory transfer which takes place here. And this particularly is of importance to the understanding of rational choice theory. Because anthropology, if we talk about Marshall Moss, if we talk about the Trobriand Islanders in Malinowski, we see that such kind of customary gifts are very, very instrumental in understanding the choices that people make in their decisions. Now, the next part or the next discipline that we will have a look to is the economics. And particularly apart from production, distribution, and consumption, we see here the concept of profit and price are equally important, because whenever we are undertaking any form of social action, we cannot deny the fact that there are certain profits, there are certain prices. For any action to take place, we always try to evaluate the possible outcome. So, what we are doing in the process? In the process, we are actually trying to evaluate that whether the profit will be more or the price will be more. And individuals in general, what do? We try to be involved. We try to get involved in those lines of actions that will yield us or that will maximize our profits. We hardly move towards that line of action that might minimize our profit or rather confer us with costs and prices. The third discipline that we are talking about here is behavioral psychology, the theory of games. Now, in case of games, we have got the certain alternatives, certain means. Now, when choosing between the alternatives or when choosing between the means, we try to understand or we try to assume from the first hand. In case of behavioral psychology, it's the theory of games that is of pertinent value because when we talk about the theory of games, there are certain options, there are certain available alternatives, and it is our perception, our duty, which is sometimes guided even by dilemmas also, which are sometimes guided by inhibitions that as to which alternative we should take at the first place. So, this theory of games is all about probability, it's all about the options available. And not only that, it's also about the probable outcome that people expect will have the most of the profits for them. So these three particular disciplines are very important for having an understanding towards the influences that rational choice theory as a theoretical framework have as a precursor. Now, if we talk about theorists on rational choice theory, the first theory we will, or theorist rather, we will be talking about is George Homans and his elementary social behavior, power, equity, and games. What we see here is the individual behavior. We as individual and our behavior are always guided by some forms of rationality. Now, this rationality might look a bit relative because it might be rational for us, but it's not always essential that it will be rational for the other person who is looking or who is having or who is present in the same scenario. So, here rationality is something which is relational. So, individual behavior, it's always guided by some rational choices. And these rational choices, they're forming the basis of social exchange. Now, when we talk about social exchange, we are aware about the fact that starting from just stepping out of the house or even within the house itself, every day within our interaction, we're exchanging. What we are exchanging? It might be tangible material, it might be intangible material. As for example, ideas. These are not tangible, these are intangible. But we do exchange. And how do we exchange those? We exchange those on the basis of the rational choices that we make. And this particular rational choice and the social exchange, this together forms a kind of corpus with that of the individual behavior. Because individual behavior here is not only being confined to the rational choice, but also it's also extending its way beyond to social exchange. it might be to some other individual, the exchange might take place, to some other groups, it might take place, or even in the society at the larger unit, it also might take place. So, George Humans is basically talking about the power, equity, and games, because what we see that in everyday relationships, or in every relationship, there is a form of power play that goes on. It might be based on the exchange mode, or it might be based on the interactions that take place based on rationality. So this was about George Homans. Now we next move to Peter Blau. He is talking about exchange and social integration norms and networks. Now what happens is, in society, in our everyday society, in our everyday life rather, we see that when we interact, when we exchange tangible and intangible forms of material and ideas with the other individuals and groups, in the process, we are guided by several norms. Now, norms in the society do exist to guide our behavior, because behavior cannot be always spontaneous. We are social animals. We do have instincts, certain instincts as species, as a living species, but we cannot really leave those instincts just free of cost, and any free of cost, because if we leave those instincts, it might lead to any form of harm to the other person. So there are within the society norms and values that guides our lines of action. It tries to accommodate us and assimilate us within a particular situation and social structure. So what we see here is Peter Blau, he's talking about exchange. He's saying that this forms the basis of social integration. For any social integration to take place, there is a requirement or necessity for exchange to take place, because if we do not exchange, how can we expect any form of unity at the first hand to take place? So, there is a necessity for exchange to take place if we want their social integration. Next is that he's saying that these exchanges and social integration just do not lie out there. They have their own systems of norms which guide the very essence of those exchange and those social integration. And not only norms, but also the networking system has its own dynamics or role to play in case of exchange and social integration. So moving on from Homans and Blau, we move towards James Coleman and the foundations of social theory. Now what he is saying? He is saying that for coalition, for social unity to be existing out there, it is very essential to have trust, because if as individuals we do not, or we cannot trust the other individuals and groups, how can we expect that there will be any coalition of any form? Because coalition cannot form and is not possible without the existence of trust. Also, we find that norms guide these forms of trust and the coalitions, because without norms, as has been also said by Peter Blau, that these norms particularly guide our lines of behavior. What should be our lines of behavior? How should we talk? How should we interact? How should we present ourselves before the other person, or before the other people rather, or the group even? So there is a whole set of norms, there is a whole set of do's and don'ts that really guide our lines of thought, and not only thought but also behavior. So this particular trust which forms the basis of coalition, it is also essential to have a perspective of norms which will guide those coalitions and the process of trust. Together, they will be forming the social capital because ultimately, if there is no formation of social capital, it really doesn't make any sense. Because at the end of the day, when we as individuals, as part of the society rather, we try to make us what is our ultimate objective or motive to make ourselves as productive as possible, that we try to make ourselves a social capital. We don't really want to make ourselves useless at any point of time because that would look us inferior in front of others. So what do? We try to prove ourselves as part of social capital. So these were the thoughts and the theories about rational choice theory. Now we move to the next part, that is the assumption part. Now, what does the assumption say? Assumption, the first assumption says that individuals are purposive and they are goal oriented. We as individuals cannot really deny the fact that, okay, we just move around here and there without any purpose. We just roam here and there. No, definitely, for every action to take place, there is a form of purpose, and hence, individuals are called purposive beings. And not only they are called purposive beings, but also they are called goal oriented. So, what is that thing? That thing is goal that drives the motivation among us for having a purpose. So, as individuals, we have certain goals in our life, and not only in life but in also everyday interactions. We have certain goals, and for that very goals set the way for the purpose. Now, what we see here is that individuals have hierarchically ordered preferred set of utilities. So, as individuals, we have utilities with us. But what marks the difference of individuals is that their preferences of hierarchies. Because I might place a particular alternative a much higher place rather than the other person. The other person might not have that preference level as much as I'm putting it. So every individual have their own hierarchy. And hierarchy of what? Hierarchy of ordered preferred set of utilities. Next assumption holds that while choosing our lines of behavior, we say that here we make rational calculations. So, whenever we are undertaking or whenever we are undergoing certain social action, what are we doing? We are making rational calculations. But with what respect do we make this kind of rational calculation? The first is the utility of alternative lines of conduct with reference to preference hierarchy. So, in the previous slide, we talked about the preference hierarchy, and there, what do we see? That within the preference hierarchy, there also lies a line of conduct. Now, you have got a certain point of preference for certain things, but for that, you need to also have a particular form of conduct. And those conducts can be having any form, and you have got with you a lot of alternative for that. For example, as I said, as I was in this previous slide, I was talking about possible ways of reaching to my destination via different modes of transport. So, what I can or what we can see here, we have got various means of transportation. Now, this means of transportation and their probable or tentative time will not only judge my choice. Suppose if I have got 100 rupees with me, I can avail a particular form of transportation to reach my destination. On the other hand, if I have only 20 rupees with me, to reach to my destination, I will have to make my preference accordingly. So, what do we see? Our preference hierarchy definitely has to be guided by an alternative lines of conduct. So, there is a kind of relation between the two. Now, next we move on that part where the cost of each alternative in terms of utility is foregone. So, what happens is our experiences teaches us what we should do and what we should not, because our past experiences guides us our present and future aspirations and choices. Because in earlier time it might happen that a particular choice that I made was really a wrong choice, and that proved that I will have to make a certain kind of price, I have to meet a certain kind of price for that choice to be made. So what will I do the next time? Will I make again the same mistake or the same choice rather? No. I will try to make some other alternative choice this time. So in terms of utilities, the cost of each alternative is being evaluated. Now the best way to maximize utility, what we do, we always try to maximize our utility, and this particular line can or assumption can be best understood in terms of bargaining while selling and buying of any forms of product or service, whatever. We see that while bargaining, what happens, the seller tries to sell off his product at some, like in any price he wants, okay, and he wants that price to be very high and or rather at a much high level. And what does the buyer wants to do? The buyer wants to curtail that price as much as possible. So what both of them are actually doing in the bargaining processes, they're actually trying to maximize the utility in the process. Next, if we look into the other assumptions, we see that emergent social phenomena like the social structures, collective decisions, or the collective behavior are ultimately the result of rational choices made by utility maximizing individuals. So, as has been said, that individuals are always utility maximizers. We as individual have always a tendency of maximizing our profits. We really don't want to incur losses in life. So this particular thing holds true even for the rational choice theory, because here it is believed that whatever social phenomena it takes place in the form of, either it can be social structures, either it can be in the forms of collective decisions, it can be in the form of collective behavior as well. So whatever be the kind of social phenomena, but these are ultimately the result or the culmination of the choices that we made. And remember, these choices are rational. Yes, the rational choices, because as has been said earlier in the slide, that the rational, though the word rational is quite relational here, because something which is rational to me might not be rational to some other person or individual. So here it's quite rational. So as far as the basic assumptions are concerned, what we find here is that there are certain emergent social phenomena like social structures, collective decisions, and collective behavior that are ultimately the result of rational choices made by utility maximizing individual. So we the individuals are utility maximizers. We always try to maximize our utilities in the fact that we try to make various kinds of rational choices, and in that process what we try to do is we see that through the rational choices, ultimately the social structures, the collective decisions, and the collective behavior, ultimately what we say is the social phenomena that we see around us, is the culmination of these rational choices that the individuals are making. So, next assumption is about the emergent social phenomena that arise from rational choices constitute a set of parameters for subsequent rational choices of individual rather. So, what we see is we as individuals try to calculate the possible costs and the possible prices rather. And also we try to calculate the possible utilities. So what we do, if a line of action is yielding more profits to me or more gains to me, I am supposed to follow that line of action in subsequent scenarios also. Next, we see that attempts have been made to explain all kinds of action, because actions are not always about conformity. There can be some actions which can be deviant as well, because individuals, as individuals, we do not really conform to the society at all times. Also, we become deviants. The emphasis is on how self-interested individuals make choices guided by their preferences. So already we have got with us a hierarchy of preferred choices, and from there what we do is we make or we use our rationality to take the probable assumptions or to undertake the probable alternatives that are available to us, so that we can utilize or we can maximize our profit. Next is, it treats social exchange as similar to economic exchange because it's all about profit, it's all about costs. And here what RCT says is all parties tries to maximize their gain or minimize their loss. So we as individuals never try to do something which will incur losses. That's a general tendency among all the individuals. So what we do, we try either to maximize our profit or we try to minimize our losses. Now, if we, after the assumptions, if we look at the premise, we will see that individuals base their behavior on rational calculation. So that forms the first demise as has been discussed in this particular presentation. Not only that, while making the choices, they use their rationality, and hence we see that where we will have more profit and where we will have less of losses. So what we are doing in this process, we are trying to use our rationality and select the possible alternative means or alternatives. Choices are aimed at optimization of profit or gain. Of course, we as individual, we always try to profit, or we always try to rather maximize and optimize our profit. We never really try to have or incur any kind of losses. So that's what is RCT all about. So, but one thing for sure, we have to understand that there are certain social phenomena which critics also say that RCT really cannot explain. For example, emotional affection. For example, altruism. Why people, certain people or some people are ready to give up their life also just on the name of some belief. Why? How can it happen? So these are the areas which cannot be explained by RCT. Now, if we talk about the strengths of rational choice theory, absolutely it holds a great apple for, or choice rather, as a model. It is holding a great apple as a model or choice over the other models, because yes, we cannot deny the fact that as individuals we use our rationality to make our choices. Not only that, the rational choice theory is very logical, and for having a proper framework of planning, it is very instrumental. Not only these two strengths it is having, the RCT is quite very well known to provide before us as individual a wide array of alternatives or wide array of options, and it ensures in the process that the best line of action is chosen by the individual, because we as individual always try to choose that line of action which will maximize our profit. But again, just like other theoretical frameworks, it has its weaknesses too. So it is just naive to assume that a stable and a widely accepted value to the structure goal setting, and also it's difficult to have each person agree on common goals. Each individual is different, so absolutely their goals are different. So one person cannot really adhere to the other person's goal, because every one of us as individuals, we are different. Everything cannot be comprehended by individuals. Yes, of course, because certain social phenomena are absolutely beyond our comprehensive level. And comprehensive rationality is censored by critics because everything cannot be universal. There are certain aspects which are particularistic in the society. So, RCT tends to ignore the essentially political dimension of social planning with regard to allocation and reallocation of sources. So, it is not only about possible cost and benefits, it's also about the political dimension, which RCT tends to ignore. Now, coming to the conclusive movement, RCT has taken root in most of the countries as the paradigm of choice, and now for decision making, to understand decision making, it's the widely used theoretical framework. But however, in order to understand its total success, it is also essential to understand the political interaction, because this has long been neglected within rational choice theory. And not only that, we also need to understand political public participation, which is the very essence of planning and decision making process. Now, the key takeaways from this particular presentation is that this RCT is based on the fact that individuals base their behavior on cost benefit assumption. Not only that, they have a purpose and they are absolutely goal oriented. They make their rational calculation in terms of making their choices, and these choices are always motivated towards profit maximization. And here, great appeal as a model this RCT holds of in terms of other models. And not only that, we have to also we also have to look at one of its weaknesses, that yes, not all social phenomena, just as I said here, that altruism, emotion, empathy, all things now cannot be explained by RCT, because this is something where individuals move beyond rationality. So, probable questions from this presentation there can be like, discuss the basic assumption of rational choice theory along with its strengths and weaknesses, and the other one is critically analyze the premise of rational choice theory in understanding human actions. So, this was all about the presentation. Hope the learners understands the assumptions with regard to rational choice theory, and thank you.